Welcome to yet another episode of the New Ventures podcast. Our guest for today is a close friend of mine, George Kibala Bauer, the Director Digital Utilities at GSMA. Welcome, George.
Hey, Sanjoy. Great to be on with you. Looking forward to the conversation.
Right. One of the things that I really want to get out of this podcast, and I hope will be very useful for donors and foundations who want to use grants, their philanthropic capital, for promoting climate technology innovation. And this podcast will help them understand a real example of how that works. But maybe we start by asking you to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Sanjoy. I have a particular passion for understanding how these digital innovations can help crowd in more financing, both public and private, into basic utility service delivery, and how digital innovations can also help extend service delivery to those currently underserved by services. In terms of my background, I have a background in developmental economics, and prior to working at the GSMA, I've gained experience in strategic consulting, development finance, economic research, and also government affairs. I'm particularly interested also in innovations related to climate tech.
Right. Thank you for that introduction. Let's talk about the grant program that you have run. Give our audience a sense of how many grants have you given out in this last several years to how many companies and projects?
Thanks, Sanjoy. Yeah, in terms of how our program operates, we kind of have four main functions as a program, and the most important one is supporting entrepreneurs in low and middle income countries, so through catalytic grant funding. We also, beyond that, do a lot of research and insights, partnership support, and technical advice. But our work really centers quite a bit around this providing of catalytic support to innovators in low and middle income countries. And throughout our program history, we've extended 53 grants to 50 organizations that since 2013 have dispersed more than £9 million in grant funding to those innovators. In terms of our most recent round, we've recently announced on digital urban services, we've recently extended a further 10 grants to 10 different organizations worth about £1.3 million. So the total number of grants, including this most recent round, is now at 63 grants.
Yeah, so that's 63 grants, about 9 million total fund grants money. I'm sure you can help them by saying how much is the typical size of an individual grant, because I know you have a couple of different variations of that.
Exactly. So in terms of the size of the grant, it differs a bit from project to project, but the most recent round on digital urban services, we had two different types of grants. One was a seed grant for very early stage companies, and the other was a market validation grant for ideas that have already been proven in the market, but would have to be scaled or replicated in another market. And depending, the seed grants used to range from 100 to 200,000 pounds, and the market validation grants were at a bit higher ticket size of about 250,000 to 300,000 pounds. In our most recent round on digital urban services, we didn't sort of make this explicit distinction between seed and market validation grants, but we made determinations on a project-to-project basis. And the ticket size in the most recent round ranged from 150,000 pounds to 250,000 pounds, depending on the project. In our most recent round, we also had, quite an explicit match funding requirement. So obviously that also determined the possible grant size for some of the applicants that applied to our fund as well. But that's kind of where we are in terms of sort of the average ticket size.
Right. George, before we get down to the history and talk about the grants you did at the beginning, maybe just tell us a little bit about the new round that you did.
So for the most recent round on essential urban services, we focused on energy, water, sanitation, and then fourth sector, which we funded for the first time, is plastics and waste management. And within energy, the goal was really to replicate and scale model for clean cooking, test and scale generation and storage solutions for urban SMEs to replace diesel generators, and also in the water sector, it was really around deepening and broadening evidence for investment by utilities and development finance institutions in pay-as-you-go models and solutions that can help utilities reduce non-revenue water. In sanitation, it was mostly around deepening the evidence for digital tools to support the scale of sanitation services through new financial models, and to understand what role digital solutions can play in improved logistics and revenue collection management, private sanitation service provider. Lastly, in plastics and waste management, we've really looked at the role of digital solutions to optimize the collection logistics, enable circular economy solutions, and provide increased transparency and traceability for municipalities and upstream buyers.
Now let's go back to history. And let's talk about the pay-as-you-go industry.
Okay, with regards to our history in the off-grid solar sector, as I mentioned, we have dispersed 53 grants to 50 organizations as a program, kind of our history. And of those 53 grants, 33 of them were in the energy sector. And within the energy sector, the bulk of our funding has gone to pay-as-you-go solar home system companies, around 22 grants out of the 33 in energy. And starting in 2013, the program funded some of the first pay-as-you-go solar home system companies like Mkopa, Phoenix, Mobisol, which have now been both acquired by Engie, and then also PEG, which according to reports has been acquired by Bbox recently. And the PAYGO business model really allowed the unbanked with no previous credit record to access financing options for assets that were previously considered unattainable to them, most notably, obviously, the solar home system. And as customers built their credit history through loan repayments, some of the companies that I mentioned, as well as others in the ecosystem, began bundling the solar home systems with other assets such as TVs, radios, fans, or even loan offerings, such for school fees, for instance, such as explored by Mkopa and Phoenix. And with the off-grid sector maturing, companies have started specializing in different parts of the value chain, such as production, distribution, and consumer financing, while offering a wider range of products, such as even pay-as-you-go smartphones like Mkopa does, water pumps, refrigerators, and cook stoves. We explored the sort of a cook stove add-on model with a grantee in Zambia that's called Vitalite. And in terms of our funding, we really initially focused on funding off-grid solar models in East Africa initially, but then once obviously the sector there grew quite a bit and there wasn't necessarily as much of a need for catalytic grant funding, we focused on trying to replicate the PAYGO model in markets in more sort of nascent markets in West Africa, and then also try to explore different models. Like I mentioned, the add-on product model that Vitalite explored, where it sold a solar home system in conjunction with a smartphone and a clean cooking stove. Or we've also supported, for instance, Solar Works in Mozambique, which was trying to leverage big data, weather data, in order kind of to optimize the solar home system offering. But overall, we've definitely seen a tremendous growth in the sector. And if you look at the follow-on funding that our grantees have been able to attract, most of this has been in the energy sector. So of the 309 million pounds, our grantees have been able to attract in follow-on funding after the grants. Remember, the sort of total grant disbursement of the Innovation Fund collectively is a bit more than 9 million pounds. So this has been able to lead to 309 million pounds in follow-on funding. But of that 309 million, the bulk of it, 295 million, is in the energy sector. And within that, most of it is in the solar home system sector. And when the GSMA began awarding grants in PAYGO Solar around 2013, the annual investment in the sector was around 20 million per year. And now this has risen to more than 300 million per year between 2017 and 2020. And in 2021, this amount rose by about 50% to reach 450 million. Obviously, debt investments in particular rising quite a lot within that period, but it just shows that the sector has been able to attract significant commercial funding after we initially started funding in the sector in 2013. And it's obviously true that there are still sort of important investment gaps in the sector as well. I mean, Gogla points out that about 90% of the investments going into off-grid solar are going to kind of the top 10 companies in the market, and sort of smaller and nascent And local service providers often face more significant funding gaps, but definitely we've seen, huge rise in funding in off-grid solar. And we believe that, part of the reason why we're seeing that growth is not just obviously the investment figures that I've just mentioned and the realization that PayGo Solar is a unique way for underserved customers in low and middle income countries, especially in remote rural areas, to access energy services quickly. It's also obviously really much connected to the growth of mobile money ecosystems. And through our research within the GSMA Digital Utilities program, we've kind of highlighted how Payasyougo Solar is actually a very valuable innovation to mobile operators, as well as it helps them increase their market penetration in rural areas, while also leading to digital adoption of mobile services by PayGo Solar customers who end up using mobile money more intensively, not just to pay for solar services, but also for other use cases such as P2P transfers. They end up charging their phones because they have energy, which leads to higher voice and data usage as well. And all of this points to kind of the synergy between rural connectivity, digital connectivity, and rural energy access, which is a really interesting space that we are looking at.
Right. One thing people think about, they link the pay-as-you-go industry with the mobile money, and they link it with East Africa. Did the industry ever grow beyond East Africa to West Africa or other parts of Africa for that matter?
The PayGo model initially thrived, particularly in East Africa, also because obviously the mobile money ecosystem in that region is particularly vibrant, particularly in Kenya, but also in countries like Uganda. But for instance, what we found quite interesting, if you look at Google sort of investment trends for 2020, that was actually the first year that West Africa was able to attract more investment into the sector than East Africa, at 142 million versus 70 million. Obviously, we've seen a lot of digital payment and mobile money ecosystems in West Africa grow as well. And there's a huge market potential in countries like Nigeria for pay-as-you-go solutions as well. And now with the changes in the mobile money regulation in Nigeria, where mobile operators are now able to provide mobile money services at greater scale, we think that's going to lead to even more growth in the sector. And there are a lot of prominent PayGo solar providers who already are operating in Nigeria at scale. Some of our innovation fund grantees, such as Lumos, are also playing an important role there. So we think that's going to certainly lead to a lot of expansion in that region as well. Though it obviously always depends on the digital payment ecosystem, as well as obviously the interplay between the off-grid sector and some of the on-grid ambitions of the country as well.
Right. Okay, great. And did the energy companies move from rural to urban areas, which kind of prompted your urban thinking?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. We kind of seen two dynamics with regards to that. So on the one hand, in the PayGo solar space, I think there was a realization that off-grid solutions are not necessarily always equivalent to rural solutions, because frankly, a lot of urban areas in some African countries with large energy access gaps are also off-grid. So for instance, in my home country, the Democratic Republic of Congo, the urban energy access rate is 19%. And similarly, there are countries like Madagascar, where the urban energy access rate is only 22%, or Liberia, where it's 16%. And even in some African countries where there is a bit of a higher sort of formal access rate, grid unreliability is a huge challenge, where blackouts are very frequent. So for instance, in Nigeria, there's a shocking statistic that 4,600 outage hours every year in Nigeria. And that's equivalent to 190 days. So grid outages are a huge challenge for both households and businesses. And what we also see is that in a lot of these countries, especially where there's a proliferation of grid unreliability, and that's a huge challenge, you see a huge presence of diesel generators, which are obviously polluting, but they're also expensive, particularly in the current context of high fuel prices as well. In Nigeria, the Access to Energy Institute estimates that diesel generators have 6 times the generation capacity of the grid. which means that there's a huge opportunity for off-grid solar providers to displace some of this consumption of that goes right now to the diesel generator industry and to replace it with more sustainable solutions. And we also see that in the market. For instance, in Nigeria, a report by the CDC, I think now known as British International Investment, found that 60% of Lumos's customer base, solar home system company that we've previously supported, is urban or peri-urban. Another example is a company called Zola, which have launched a product called Infinity, which is uniquely tailored to the challenge of grid unreliability. So the system automatically switches off when the grid does work, but switches back on when it doesn't. Similarly, in the DRC, Bbox, a prominent off-grid solar provider, has primarily focused a lot of its attention on cities in the DRC which are underserved. Initially in Eastern Congo, cities such as Goma and Bukavu, but also the capital, Kinshasa, where a lot of people also face issues related to grid unreliability because the state-owned utility SNEL is notoriously unreliable. So we've seen a lot of examples like this, and I guess this is sort of solar home system companies focusing on urban areas in countries with a large energy access gap. And then secondly, what we've also seen is the proliferation of the PAYGO model. We kind of call it a PAYGO solar to PAYGO everything.
So George, tell me, when companies move from rural to urban, as Bbox, the example that you gave of Bbox and Lumos, just to help our audience understand this, do the systems grow in size? Because obviously in the rural areas, people need less electricity, but in the urban areas, people use it for their larger houses, shops, businesses. Just tell us a little bit about how the size change happens.
Thanks, Sanjoy. It really depends. So in some instances, solar home system providers that operated in Nigeria, for instance, have tailored the systems to be able to power more appliances. In other instances, the ability to pay of urban customers isn't necessarily that much greater than those in rural areas. So if you, for instance, compare a urban customer in a city like Goma in the DRC to a rural customer in Kenya, obviously the urban customer will likely have a bit of a higher willingness and ability to pay, but it's not as much of a difference as in the Nigeria Kenya comparison because of the level, obviously widespread poverty and the level of underservedness in the DRC. But generally speaking, yes, system sizes have increased to kind of accommodate the interests of our urban customers more.
Right. System sizes have increased, but also have the type of users changed from residential to commercial businesses? For example, worldwide, we've had this solar rooftop industry as well, right? Has the off-grid solar, this segment moved up to the solar rooftop sector, or maybe the solar rooftop sector has moved down a little bit to the off-grid sector?
It's a really interesting question. I think in order to power sort of business activity, a lot of solar home systems just don't have the required size, and unless we're talking about small sort of shopkeepers or shops that want to offer sort of small scale IT solutions or phone charging options, those can definitely benefit from that proliferation. But when it comes to larger business activity, there needs to be sort of greater generation capacity as well. But we've seen some interesting solutions in that space as well. For instance, in Nigeria, there's a company called RentSource, which kind of provides microgrid solutions to marketplaces. And in the Democratic Republic of Congo, there's a mini-grid provider called Nuru, which installed one of the biggest urban mini-grids in the city of Goma, which is powering a lot of business activity there. So I think it's interesting to see some of the developments in the kind of mini-grid sector as well and how they relate to the urban energy access challenge.
Right. And that brings me to ask you that, we've spoken a lot about the pay-as-you-go solar industry because, that's where a large number of grants were located. But you also provided some grants to mini-grid companies as well, right? I remember. And can you give us a little sense of, did investments move into the mini-grid sector in the same way as it did in the pay-as-you-go solar industry?
Yeah, thanks for that question. That's a really interesting one. And I think it relates to some of the things that I was speaking about earlier with regards to the role of the off-grid solar sector in urban areas as well. I think, obviously pay-go companies are benefiting from the opportunities in some of these markets like Nigeria and DRC that I mentioned, but obviously solar home systems are not sort of long-term sustainable energy access solutions for urban areas when it comes to powering business activity, right? So if you look at integrated energy planning by a lot of rural electrification agency, the sort of optimal long-term role of solar home systems is kind of seen to be in sort of remote settlements where grid extensions would take a long time to get to, and the areas also where there's not enough energy demand for mini-grids. But mini-grids, actually, we've provided 8 grants to mini-grid providers throughout our kind of program history. And 5 of those have been to power what's called an anchor-based client model, where we're really trying to look at the synergies between energy access and digital connectivity that I was also alluding to earlier. And under the anchor business client model, a telecom tower serves as the anchor client of a mini grid, which then also provides power to the surrounding community. And we've trialed that model initially when we started as a program. And there were a lot of unique challenges to that model. For example, stakeholder alignment. Telcos think very differently about electrification and the scale they think about the subject as well than mini grid providers did at the time. And then it's also often difficult to bring the level of energy demand of the surrounding community to a level where it's profitable for the mini grid. We've done some really interesting projects, for instance, in Nepal with a company called GAM Power, which did this ABC model with the telecom operator Ncell, and mobile money was used for bill payment and smart meters were deployed to monitor individual consumption. And in that model, we saw that the small business activity of customers in the villages that were powered by GAM Power microgrids was especially critical for the financial sustainability of the model. But we also saw that small businesses were the one that benefited most from the arrival of the mini grid, and that also points to a lot of research kind of in kind of the energy access space, a lot of academic research which suggests that energy access is the most transformational when it's linked to business activity and productive use. We've also supported another model with Électricité de Madagascar in Madagascar, where a market validation grant to EDM to test the commercial viability of providing electricity to off-grid villages in northern Madagascar, alongside supporting the mobile operators Telma's off-grid mobile base stations. And quite excitingly, Axian Group and Sagemcom, which were 2 of the companies supporting this project, created a venture arm for energy called WeLight, which recently received major investment from Norfund. And they're now expanding in Madagascar, but also in other markets such as Mali. So that shows that while the mini-grid sector has taken some more time to scale the way the pay-go solar home system sector has, there's some exciting new initiatives, and there's some really important work being done by organizations like the Africa Mini-Grid associations, but also by some investors that are focusing on mini-grids, especially to really overcome some of the barriers to scale. Though it must be said that obviously the mini-grid sector is also more prone to challenges such as changing government regulation, supply chain issues, and obviously also the difficulty of assessing energy demand, although there are a lot of new data-driven solutions that are trying to address that challenge as well.
Right, and I'm glad that you're sort of saying that there is some opportunity for mini-grid projects to develop. At least you're seeing some opportunities, because I know I've been involved in this quite a few years and it's been extremely challenging. But one thing is also the pay-as-you-go industry has moved beyond household electrification, both in rural areas and urban areas, which you have talked about earlier, but has become, for example, being used in productive loads, in agriculture, solar irrigation, for example. And I know you have some experience there. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. We've seen a lot of interest in solar irrigation, particularly, and interesting because we've recently announced an innovation fund round, which came after the one on digital urban services that I alluded to earlier, and that was all on around climate resilience and a lot of applicants to that round. We haven't announced sort of who we will be awarding grants to yet, but a lot of the applicants to that round have been in the solar water pump space. Through our innovation fund, we've supported Sun Culture as well. And this is obviously one of the pioneers in the Paygo solar irrigation space. They've scaled a lot, have been able to attract a lot of funding from follow-on investors, and have been also trialing very innovative financing models, including with local banks and financing institutions in Kenya. But also more recently, they've struck a partnership with Bbox in Togo to also benefit from this wider subsidy program, which will end up providing subsidies to farmers to acquire solar irrigation through sun cultures technology. And I think what we've seen through that grant is that solar water pumps tend to have a quite catalytic impact because they are quite focused on increasing the productivity of farmers, and they're quite focused on increasing the business activity of productive use cases. So that's why I think the sector is going to continue to see a lot of growth.
Great. So the other thing that we must talk about when we talk about energy is, of course, cooking. And I know you have a couple of examples there.
Yeah, clean cooking is definitely also an important sector for us, especially because sort of the clean cooking gap under sort of SDG 7 is even greater than the gap to energy access. So a lot more action needs to happen in this space. We haven't provided as many grants as sort of in the solar home system or Minigrid space in the clean cooking space, but one project that was quite interesting was the two grants we've provided to Copa Gas. We've initially funded a pilot of their technology in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and have then funded them through a subsequent market validation grant, which enabled them to scale. And they've developed basically an LPG smart meter, which allows urban customers that are sort of low-income urban customers and primarily living in informal settlements to access clean cooking solutions through LPG on a pay-as-you-go basis. So gas can be consumed incrementally. Copa Gas has even developed a solution through which different households can share cooking gas amongst themselves, which is quite interesting for circumstances like informal settlements where different households may be able to rely on the same cylinder. But digital solutions were very core to their business from the onset, and I'll expand on that in a bit. But the most important thing about what we were really happy about is that in January 2020, Circle Gas acquired Copa Gas's LPG smart metering technology in a transaction worth $25 million. And we think that this acquisition is actually the first ever sort of pure private equity investment in the clean cooking technology sector, and it gives Circle Gas, as I mentioned, access to the Paygo LPG technology. Now Circle Gas itself is an interesting company because Safaricom, Kenya's leading mobile operator, is an investor in Circle Gas as well. And Circle Gas will be introducing sort of the Copa Gas prepaid smart metering solutions in Kenya through its subsidiary MGas, and it will leverage Safaricom's obviously mobile money platform, but also its Narrowband IoT network in order to serve customers. And this is going to be, and this is really exciting for us because obviously the way we look at our catalytic funding, as I mentioned before, is how much private sector investment and how much scale can it enable, and to see such a great acquisition in a sector like clean cooking was really great for us. And it was also really great to see a mobile operator like Safaricom really seeing value in a clean cooking service provider and seeing strategic value there.
This is obviously extremely important. I think we all understand what the prepaid smart cards are in the cooking gas industry, but what is narrowband IoT platform?
So this is a great question because we are working with a lot of different innovators that are leveraging a range of IoT solutions, but basically the narrowband IoT is sort of a mobile operator-led IoT network. In a lot of low and middle income countries, there aren't any mobile operator-led IoT networks deployed yet. There are, for instance, in South Africa, but in a lot of other low and middle income countries, particularly in Africa, they're emerging. So there are other sort of IoT network solutions such as LoRa as well. But this is indeed a very complex sector. So we are actually in the process of publishing a report about IoT solutions in low and middle income countries during this year. And we're looking to also talk a bit more about the opportunities that we see in the sector, but also how private sector innovators and utility service providers can navigate the different offerings and hardware solutions that exist out there. It's definitely a very interesting, but also very complex and highly technical space. And because we've had a lot of innovators navigating some of these challenges without necessarily always having access to all the information or complexity, we think, this is also a key area for us to do more research in. So this is why we're really excited about the report. Maybe just to add on two things on clean cooking, we're really excited to also learn more about other solutions in the clean cooking sector, because obviously gas is one solution, but it's a hotly debated topic whether low and middle income countries in particular should focus more on gas as a clean cooking solutions or on other solutions such as ECooking or for instance, biomass as well. So through our new innovation fund on digital urban services, we'll be supporting a company called ATAC in Bangladesh, which is going to provide e-cooking solutions to customers in Bangladesh through a Payasyougo solution. And then also another company called Power Stove in Nigeria that's going to work on biomass cook stoves with an IoT solution. So really excited to learn more about the clean cooking sector and the role of digital innovation in it through those two grand projects as well.
Right. And I think that is important because in the context of this clean energy access, perhaps in a more rapid progress is being made on making electricity available as opposed to cooking solutions available. So in Bangladesh, for example, where ATC, your grantee, is active, or Cambodia, where as well, electricity access problems have in the countries have made very rapid progress, but people still use outmoded ways of cooking. So using ECooks is another interesting option in these contexts. Having said that, one thing that I'm really happy, George, that you're producing a report on low and IoT solutions for low and middle income countries, because I remember I have struggled with helping one company, just get to the complexities of some of these LoRa technologies. And maybe that is another time I should get you back on the podcast to sort of demystify this. While you're saying that, one thing I remembered, people talk about as if pay-as-you-go and mobile money was easy, but even that, there are complexities involved. And I remember you having done some interesting project which helped the whole industry. Just remind me of it. I'll describe the problem to you. The problem is that when a customer in a rural area, let's say in rural Kenya or somewhere else, makes a payment, it was not immediately obvious where the payment came from, right? So often the customer made the payment, but had to wait for a long time for the system to get up and running. And in the meantime, was making to the call center. And you did a inserted technology piece that helped solve that problem.
Yes, no, that's a great point. And thanks also for highlighting that there are definitely complexities, and the scaling of the sector involves overcoming a lot of them. But yeah, one key challenge that we identified that was a barrier to the scaling of the PayGo ecosystem is the need for instant payment notifications. So when a user needs to unlock a solar home system to receive solar services, they usually pay using mobile money. the mobile money provider then transfers the user's payment notification to the payee provider, but oftentimes they ran into a problem because there was no real-time notification to mobile money providers that payment has been made and by which customer that payment has been made. So then the next step would be that the PayGo service provider sort of would have to manually validate and process a payment notification. But the problem with that is this manual process is often prone to errors and often causes delays in service delivery, which obviously erodes trust in PayGo services, because if you're kind of a rural service provider, you want to make sure that your customers get the service they want immediately after paying, because otherwise they'll think that this new innovative technology might be a scam. The issue when PayGo provider is not able to immediately deliver the services following the payment, it erodes trust, and especially because this is an innovative service, and obviously a lot of people don't know how it works properly. So if it doesn't lead to service delivery immediately, that's the concern. And the problem is that this manual process of validation and the processing of the payment notification can be avoided if the PayGo solar provider integrates with a mobile money provider. The issue with that is that there are over 144 mobile money deployments in Africa alone. And if you're a PayGo solar provider working in a market with, let's say, 3 or 4 different mobile money providers, you would obviously want to integrate with all of them so that your customers can use any mobile money service they please in order to make payments. But unfortunately, oftentimes the integration time can be significant. So the time it takes for a PayGo solar provider to integrate with a mobile operator's mobile money platform. Some operators have worked hard on making this easier and facilitating this, but it still remains a challenge. And a lot of nascent and new entrants into markets even find it difficult to convince mobile operators as to why they even should integrate with their platform, because it obviously also takes some effort for the mobile operator to do this integration, and a lot of them do not necessarily see the point to integrate with sort of a nascent company. So our solution was really aimed at addressing this challenge of lacking instant payment notifications and the long time it takes to integrate with a mobile operator's mobile money service. And that has led us to create the instant payment notification hub, where when sort of the user pays using mobile money, the IPN hub then automatically relays the payment notification to the PayGo service provider. The PayGo service provider then validates that request and processes the authorization of service, which then leads the customer to get access to solar services. The IPN hub has really reduced the time it takes for PayGo solar companies to provide services to customers, and it's been especially important for new market entrants that want to integrate with multiple mobile money service providers at a time. Has been quite key for some of our grantees as well. For example, Vitalite, for instance, when they scaled from Zambia to Malawi, they relied on the IPN hub to gain access to instant payment notification in Malawi without having to go through the process of mobile money integrations with all the providers and with all the mobile money providers in a new market. It's still desirable, obviously, to go through some of these integrations, but in the meantime, the IPN app offers a great solution for new market entrants, as I mentioned. We, as a GSMA, actually processed a lot of these innovations initially in-house, but obviously as a foundation, we're not well placed to manage an innovation like the IPN hub forever. So we've decided to transition the IPN hub to the private sector, to a payment company called Bionic, which acquired the IPN hub. Bionic was also recently acquired by another fintech company in Africa, which you might have heard of, Sanjoy. It's called MFS Africa. And we hope now through MFS Africa and their large footprint throughout the continent, the IPN hub solution will be scaled to even more markets, so even more stakeholders can leverage it.
This just speaks to the complexity of deploying solutions in this area. In my opinion, just to sort of go back to the beginning and the objective of talking to you, George, to help other foundations understand what it takes to promote innovation. I think, hearing you speak, one thing they should take away is that it requires putting a team together which deeply understands the space and, is working with companies to understand, where the challenges are and, what industry-wide solutions are needed. So that's a message I would like to give to them. I think we've talked a lot about energy and cooking. Let's move to water. You said at the beginning that most of the additional funding that your grants leveraged went into energy. But I think we are seeing some traction in water as well, right?
We definitely do see some traction in water as well. And obviously, given the service gaps that exist in the water sector as well, we think this is a really important area to focus on for digital innovators as well. But I think it is also a reality that the water sector and the sanitation sector, where we work in as well, is not equivalent to the energy sector. And we also have to take into account different roles that governments play, the public good attributes in the water sector, and also considerations regarding willingness and ability to pay. That being said, we're quite excited about some of our innovations that we've already funded in the water sector, and we think they have had some quite significant impact, both in terms of social, commercial, but also development impact. So one of the examples of the solutions that we funded, I think Sanjoy, you know this one well as well, is an organization called WonderKid, and it offers software as a service solutions such as billing, customer management, and revenue management for water utilities in African countries. We've provided WonderKid with a grant in conjunction with Safaricom to work with 4 water utilities in Kenya. And Kiwasco, one of the 4 water utilities supported by the project in the city of Kisumu in Kenya, recorded a 28% increase in revenue collected and an 8% increase in revenue billed after working with WonderKid. And the average complaint resolution time by which the utility was able to resolve customer complaints dropped from more than 15 days, 6 days. And what's quite exciting for us on the WonderKid example, a team of Kenyan technologists that has funded and scaled the company. And also the company, as I mentioned, initially worked with 4 water utilities through the project we funded, but now it has worked with over 30 water utilities in 5 African countries. And obviously by partnering with utility and providing services to it directly, you're able to impact quite wide customer base and help the utility, address challenges such as revenue management and also decreasing non-revenue water, extending services to low-income customers as well. And we've written a report kind of looking at the scaling journey of WonderKid called Scaling Digital Solutions in the Water Sector, if you're interested to learn more. Another company we're quite excited about is CityTaps. It's a company we've supported in Niger initially to deploy a prepaid smart metering solution in collaboration with the Société d'Exploitation d'Eau du Niger, SEN, in Niger, and also the mobile operator Orange Niger. So we've provided, similarly to Copagas, provided 2 grants to CityTaps, and the latest one was to continue scaling its service in the capital of Niger, Niamey, by deploying 1,325 smart meters. And what's exciting about CityTaps is the prepaid smart metering solution enables utilities such as SEN in Niger to extend service delivery to low-income customers without taking on the financial risk that's associated with it. It enables, by offering a prepaid solutions, low-income customers that wouldn't be able to sort of pay for services on a monthly basis can pay incrementally for water services on a prepaid basis. And those water meters that prepaid installs transfer the payments in real time so that water utilities can improve their cash flow and balance sheet. And CityTaps has expanded, their service offering and to not just work in Niger, where the utility Sen has ordered 10,000 additional prepaid smart meters, but also in Burkina Faso, Mali, Senegal, and Kenya. And it's been able to attract additional funding from private sector investors, as well as sort of foundations and impact investors like the Global Innovation Fund and Vittel Foundation, for example. And we've seen that this sort of model of prepaid smart metering is also potentially unlocking interesting financing models where commercial lenders such as banks in Kenya are looking at the digital payment stream that sort of CityTaps prepaid smart meters are sort of guaranteeing, and are looking at whether that can be used as collateral for investments into the prepaid smart metering hardware infrastructure. So this is a potentially great way for utilities to also attract some of the vital private investment that they need in order to extend a service offering to low-income customers.
Extremely interesting, actually. And one thing that I'm realizing as you were speaking is that, we discussed the rural-urban divide, if you may, in the energy business models, but in the water sector, it's probably a lot of it is urban, right?
Yeah, I think in the water sector, we've supported some rural water solutions as well, looking at solutions like smart hand pumps, but also done an interesting project with Safe Water Network in Ghana, looking at the role that mobile-based revenue collection can play in making sort of rural water service delivery more effective. But I think given the huge challenges related to rapid urbanization we see in Africa and Asia, 90% of total urban growth from now until 2050 will be concentrated in Africa and in Asia. And a lot of utility service providers are already, facing challenges related to this rapid process of urbanization, which takes place in a context of, huge inequality. Is a particularly large challenge to formal water service delivery. So you see huge gaps in access to safe water services when you look at sort of the top 20% of the urban income distribution versus the bottom 20%. And you also see a huge proliferation of private water cartels in cities throughout low and middle income countries, which sell water which isn't sort of safely managed necessarily to customers in informal settlements at 40 times the price that the formal utility would charge. And that's almost a tax on poverty, as people that are already facing a lot of hardship because they live in informal settlements now also have to spend more time and money in order to access water services, which further perpetuates poverty. And we've seen a lot of innovators trying to address that challenge. So for instance, in Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh, we've supported a really, really great innovator called Minhas Choudhury, and his team at Drinkwell who's come up with a water ATM solution, which he is delivering, interestingly, in partnership with the utility called Dhaka Wasa. And that model enables Dhaka Wasa to provide safely managed water services through Drinkwell's water ATM in Dhaka's informal settlements, and customers of Drinkwell's services are able to access safely managed drinking water and also decrease the time that they spend accessing that water compared with, unsafe alternatives like informal tanker trucks. And it's really exciting that we've seen the World Bank as well as P4G support the scaling of this model, both in Dhaka, but also in another city in Bangladesh called Chittagong. And we think also the increasing stresses that cities will face when it comes to climate change. I mean, most cities expected to experience the most water stress over the next 30 years are located in low and middle income countries. These solutions will become even more vital, and we hope that more impact investors and donors will focus on the challenge, because we think that urban water service delivery will be a key development challenge going forward. Making sure that water is served affordable and reliable fashion.
And the same goes for sanitation as well, right? As these countries urbanize, in the informal area, there'll be the sanitation challenges as well. And you have supported a few projects there.
Absolutely. In a lot of cities in low and middle income countries, low income urban population primarily relies on non-sewered sanitation. And obviously in contexts where there are informal settlements or unplanned settlements, extending sewer networks can be extremely challenging and costly for the city, especially if there's already a lot of underinvestment in the sanitation sector. So there need to be solutions, innovative solutions that can respond to the challenge of non-sewered sanitation. One such solution are container-based sanitation providers, which use sort of waterless toilets and circular economy solutions to transform, treat, transport, collect, and contain the waste. One such solution is Luwad in Madagascar, which we've supported by enabling it to integrate digital revenue collection and logistics management platform. Another one is Synergy, which works in Nairobi, but also in Kisumu in Kenya at a quite big scale to provide container-based sanitation services. In terms of the role of digital technology in this space, I think the coordination of logistics through mobile apps and GIS technology is quite important, given that the gross margin of some of these container-based sanitation providers is very sensitive to the frequency of collection. So being able to manage logistics more effectively is really important. Digital revenue collection can also decrease operational costs quite significantly. And then there's also enterprise resource planning, where digital solutions can potentially reduce the cost for some container-based sanitation service providers. For our new innovation fund round, we're exploring a different solution, another container-based sanitation solution, but a public toilet model through a solution through a company called Bumijo, which is going to be providing affordable sanitation through public toilets in Dhaka. So really excited to learn more about the sector there. Also wanting to explore some synergies between topics like fecal sludge management and waste management. But I think what's really important is to understand that obviously in the sanitation sector, willingness and ability to pay is very different than in sectors like energy. The role of subsidies and public finance is very critical. And we're really excited to see for which kind of models governments, private sector innovators, and donors together can find approaches that can respond to the challenges of non-sewered sanitation. And it's really interesting to see initiatives like the citywide inclusive sanitation initiative by the Gates Foundation, which is being supported by a couple of other organizations, which is really trying to create an enabling environment and a framework which will allow public sector to create an enabling environment for private sector innovators to feed into, because oftentimes the service mandate for sanitation still rests with public sector authorities, either water utilities and municipalities, and they need to provide clarity so that private sector innovators and other partners can clearly feed into an existing framework. What's also potentially interesting is to look at cross-subsidization opportunities where certain private sector innovators might use the profit margin they gain from other revenue streams or by serving richer customers to use those to then provide subsidized access to low-income customers.
Great. With that, I have to say thank you to you, George. It's been a wonderful conversation, but we're not ending now, actually. In the next episode, we will come back and distill from all these business models that you have had rich experience in working with and supporting to understand some broader lessons around innovation. And in particular, the issue of partnerships between smaller companies and the larger companies that help make innovation possible in lower and middle income countries in the climate tech domain. So don't go away, come back right here for the second conversation with George.
Thanks a lot, Sanjoy. It's been great to speak. And yeah, looking forward to part 2 of this conversation and really highlighting the interplay between large organizations such as government and corporates and their relationship with the startup ecosystem. since that's been core to our work as well.